Yeah.
It's happening. Looks like. Hold on. Let's see.
So it's been live streamed on both, showing now YouTube.
Right. Yes. Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll start now.
Yes. Let's start.
Good morning, everyone. A warm and heartfelt welcome to our webinar today. We are thrilled to have you all join us for this exciting event, and we'd like to express our gratitude for your presence here. We look forward to a dynamic and enriching discussion. We are honored to introduce our guest for today's webinar, who will share his insights and expertise with us shortly. I will hand over the virtual stage to the chair of the India Center, Professor Pankaj Jain, and request him to introduce our guest, Professor Madhu Mangal Chaturvedi. Over to you.
Thank you, Sanchari. Thank you for everything. I'm privileged and pleased to welcome my colleague whom I met in Shimla, where I am at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study at present, and that's where I met him. So Dr. Madhu Mangal Chaturvedi teaches philosophy at the School of Philosophy and Culture in Shri Mata Vaishno Devi University, Katra in Jammu and Kashmir. And he did his PhD from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, IIT Kanpur. His research focuses on exploring the problem of consciousness from a multidisciplinary perspective. The primary research project is a comparative study of contemporary and Indian theories of consciousness. He recently completed his first spell of associateship at UGC Inter-University Center for Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. That's where I met him. So welcome, Madhu, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Jain, and for this invitation. I guess I'm audible. So I will turn off my video and start this presentation. Let me share my screen first and then. I hope it is. So I'll turn off my video and I'll. It works. Is it visible,
Yes.
clear?
Yes, all good, yes.
Yes. So once again, I thank Professor Jain, Pankaj Jain for encouraging me to present this, make a presentation. And as you already heard, this is also a part of the project that I did during my first spell at Shimla. Although it has been a problem which has been on our mind since for quite a few years, because as an Indian student of philosophy, we always try to, I mean, it's all spontaneous that things, when we study something from the Indian perspective or Western perspective, immediately the Indian counterpart comes to our mind. And the question is, of course, it remains whether such comparisons are feasible or not. But at least when it comes to consciousness, it is because it is something universal. So any theory of consciousness will have to be, I mean, it has to be universally acceptable as well. Now, this brain-Brahm dichotomy actually just presents, or rather, it represents the different approaches of, or rather, the different worldviews. So, on the one hand, there is this materialist worldview, reductionist, physicalist worldview of sciences. On the other hand, there is this world view of, you could say, spiritualist, which goes back, in our at least Indian tradition, goes back to the time of Upanishads. And when we talk about Brahma specifically, we am here concerned with the Advaita view, that is non-dualism of Shankara's Advaita view of consciousness. And Brahma is the term that is used to refer to that absolute consciousness. And of course, brain, we have heard about it, we all know about it as the most important organ in our anatomy. And this is the the contender for the source of consciousness. So apparently, all the evidences point that there is some very strong connection between brain and consciousness. But on the other hand, we have another view which says that the consciousness is the most fundamental reality, and it is, in fact, reality is consciousness. So you can see the dichotomy here. One cannot be, both cannot be true. Either reality is physical and consciousness is reducible to brain, or reality is fundamentally consciousness. So the overview will be discussing it's in the context of problem of consciousness, and then we'll be talking about consciousness as it is explained by the as a neurophysiological phenomena. So we are calling that brain consciousness. And the view that consciousness is fundamental reality, the very nature of reality is consciousness. That is Brahma consciousness. And then brain-Brahm dichotomy, a bit on that, and then concluding remarks. So initially we have to, before any such endeavor, what is the purpose? Why one should be really bothered about any problem whatsoever? So the problem of consciousness is, or the issue of consciousness itself, is a challenge for all those who believe in the the reality being physical, they're fundamentally physical. And again, the modern day physics points towards this, that we have all the evidence which suggests that reality is fundamentally physical. But then when we think of consciousness, it lacks that kind of physicality. You could say that it seems non-physical, and what it means we'll see shortly. But at the same time, consciousness is very much connected to our self, that is, consciousness as the source of self-knowledge, because in this world, our existence is, to begin with, is of self-aware or conscious beings. So the answer to the nature of consciousness is also relevant and extremely important for human beings as their true nature. So if we are pure only physical and consciousnesses, and again an evolutionary product of evolution, that it does not have the same significance and meaning as it has when it's something which is intrinsic and essential. So our conception of ourself as a human being and self-importance also varies depending upon what view we have. So what is actually the problem of consciousness? So again, to repeat some earlier points, if universe is fundamentally physical, and then how could you explain consciousness in this framework, the physicalist framework, where every phenomenon is physical and it has to have a physical cause? And on the other hand, if the other view is that universe is fundamentally conscious, which simply means goes beyond even panpsychism. There are views that will transcend panpsychism. Panpsychism meaning that everything is conscious, and that is the corollary of this. If you believe this thesis that consciousness, fundamental reality is fundamentally conscious, that means everything that we see around ourselves, including not just ourselves, but the tables and chairs and rocks, that there seems to be that everything is conscious. But then we don't see that way. I mean, it will be like transgressing our epistemic boundaries, but still, it seems that there is stuff which is living and there is stuff which is non-living. Similarly, there is some living stuff or some stuff which is conscious and some stuff which is not conscious. So that is the crux of the issue. Now, before we say anything more, we have to also see what is the view on consciousness, how we define consciousness. So in contemporary literature, especially analytic philosophy of mind, since the interest has been revived in the consciousness studies, a phrase popularized by Thomas Nagel in his paper, 1974 paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat, has become very rather famous, and that is, there is something it is like to be for a creature. That is, if you're conscious, that means there is something it is like to be for you or for the organism. Now, again, it is very vague, but apparently it means that there is nothing it is like to be a table or rock, a chair, or a book, but or a laptop, maybe even. But certainly there is something it is like to be a human being, a Madhu Mangal Chaturvedi, or a Professor Pankaj Jain. So there is some internal, subjective space is there in which we have all our experiences, all our mental life is going on. So starting from uh, the Ghost in the Machine dubbing of Riles by of Descartes. So it seems that there is one private life going on which is from within, and then there is also publicly observable life. So the analogy would be, or rather, the idea is that perhaps there is no private life, subjective private life, internal life, psychological life, what we call psychological or psychical, or there is no mental life in a table or rock. And there are, in hierarchy, there are human beings have more or most richest of mental life with all sorts of experiences, but tables and chairs lack that. So consciousness is first and foremost about subjective experience. It is about phenomenology. That is, Anil said in his book Being You in 2021. So what is this phenomenology? As we all understand that we have all rich experience, what we call experience, that different experiences through different the five sensory channels at least that we have, sense of touch or color experiences, auditory experiences, feeling of pain being the paradigm example. So we have all sorts of experiences, and this is what our consciousness is. These all experiences together form our one conscious life. And we can, based on this, we can also talk about some features of consciousness. That is qualia, as I said, that qualitative experiences. Why they're called qualia? Because the idea is that there is some quality attached to those experiences. So when I see red color, is different. My seeing a blue color. Similarly, taste of coffee is different from taste of tea. So these are different experiences with different quality. So we say that conscious experiences have different qualities. Second is intentionality, which again it's about directedness or aboutness. So our mental states, conscious mental states, are always about something. We desire of something. We think when we think about something, it is different from sensory experience in the sense that you to experience something immediately, that there has to be that sense object contact. That is, to taste the coffee, you have to taste, it has to come into contact with your taste buds. But intentionality means you can think about things which are not apparently present before your senses. And these are all subjective, means you have the direct first person access to these mental states or your conscious states, which means that you are always the first person to know about it, and perhaps the only person to know about it in the real sense of knowing. Otherwise, all the descriptions of your experience will fail to communicate what your experience is. So these are some seems to be intrinsic qualities or intrinsic features of conscious experience. And then there is self-luminosity, in the sense that consciousness or any conscious experience is self-luminous, that you have immediately you know what it is, and it seems to be primary, so that means it seems that it is not derived from anything else, but it is you. it seems to be very fundamental to our being, conscious being. Now, the another way to put it is that when we come to these days, the theories, the reductionist theories, those who are trying to understand consciousness uh, as a phenomenon which is located or which is produced by brain, there is something called generation problem. And this is where the phenomenal physical divide, phenomenal being, consciousness with all its phenomenal qualities, and the physical world. So there's the divide is this again somewhat repetition of the points that I made. Seeger has called it, William Seeger in his book. This is the second edition of the book. So consciousness, an introduction and assessment, theories of consciousness and introduction and assessment. So there he has coined this phrase generation problem. The problem is how the brain generates something like consciousness. And again, here you can see the prima facie a case where the something which is the physical brain is physical because it is objectively accessible. So the tissue, brain tissue, you can, when you open up a skull, you will find the brain, and then it is cortex, and then there are the different structures of the brain, starting from the hindbrain, midbrain, and the starting from brainstem upwards, and up to the cortex, which is the latest or the most evolved one. So it is densely populated, uh, uh, packed volume of nerve cells. But whatever is happening in that brain, that is objectively accessible. We can take readings, we can do scans these days, fMRI and whatnot. But how come something like objective brain is producing subjective consciousness? And subjective at the on top of that, having all that phenomenal experience. So all in all, it is consciousness which is actually studying the brain, and the brain is also generating the consciousness. So there is some kind of circularity here. But the it seems very counterintuitive to people to think that the physical brain can produce phenomenal consciousness. Then, of course, against these reductionist theories, which were arguing to identify conscious states with brain states, the Chalmers, David Chalmers, starting with his work in 1996, 95, especially in his famous book, in Consciousness, Search for a Fundamental Theory, The Conscious Mind in Search of a Fundamental Theory, he raises the question that what is the reason do we have that there is a necessary connection between neurophysiological processes and conscious experiences? Because we can imagine, conceive cases where all this neurophysiological processes is going on, but still consciousness is absent. His famous zombie thought experiment that I could have a zombie twin that is who looks functionally, behaviorally alike, but who might lack consciousness. And if such beings are conceivable, that means that we cannot really say that neurophysiological processing explains consciousness and what he called the hard problem consciousness. So there are other views about about consciousness, reductionist theories of consciousness. One of them is, let's say, for example, is illusionism. Illusionism is the view about consciousness that phenomenal consciousness is an illusion, and the idea is that something which is not reducible to physical, maybe it is just it's illusion created by the brain. So the question is now that the problem is not that how the physical brain is producing phenomenal consciousness, but rather why and how the phenomenal consciousness, illusion of consciousness or phenomenal consciousness is being generated by brain. And one of the reasons why is that there are brain whatever we see is all our cognition is definitely powered by the neurophysiological processing in the brain. And just to take an example, now that everybody is neuroscientologists have almost confirmed it. For example, there are no colors in the world. All the information that brain receives is indirect, and it is in the form of physical energy. So all that electromagnetic radiation that is coming, the what we visual spectrum, and among the invisible one, the, let's say, infrared, which we experience as the warmth or the heat, they all, they all enter into the brain by transduction into the neurochemical, signals. So all the data that is coming from the outside environment, it does not have anything what you call color or sound. Maybe everything is being fed to the brain in terms of neuroelectrical chemical signals, and then brain generates the world that we experience. So this much is true, this much is a fact. It seems more or less a fact or scientific fact, which is maybe undeniable to the knowledge of to the whatever knowledge we have. But still, how does it happen? So in one way we could say that it's like color is created by brain. Similarly, everything that is created is by brain is, and it is nothing more than illusion, a very consistent, convincing, illusion. However, there are views where, when we come to physicalism, the the idea is that universe is fundamentally physical, and then consciousness has to be reducible to the physical basis. The brain, again, even in illusionism, you are explaining consciousness as an illusion with the example of how with the example of how brain functions. The question for the physicalists is those who are more direct, who want to directly reduce consciousness to something physical. Their brain seems to be the best contender. And why it is so? Because the consciousness seems to be unmistakably tied to the brain. The picture that we all and the individual self and all that coherent, unified, and phenomenal world of the individual self that we have, it is very much because of the brain, at least to our so far. If you are not a hardcore dualist, certainly it is the brain which is powering it. And brain itself is a massively parallel distribution. It's basically interconnected, massively parallel, interconnected network of neurons, and billions of neurons. And perhaps it is that which is generating consciousness. That is the overwhelming, at least this is the idea or overwhelming view. Somewhere the other, whatever theory you have, at least you have to keep that in account about brain. And what we see is
Unfortunately, looks like the speaker lost either his Wi-Fi connection or power. I'm not sure. Let's wait for a few minutes. Unfortunately, we lost audio and video both, right? Professor Chaturvedi. This has happened first time, unfortunately.
I think he's trying to join.
Okay, all right, good.